This is The Collector. Thank you all for the warm welcome last week to this dark corner of the world. We have for you this evening some new terrifying stories to keep you up at night. But before we get into those, if you're enjoying the content and want to hear more chilling horror stories, comment below and let us know what subjects you want to hear next. And if you're new to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. It really helps our content grow. Now, let's get into these stories. Fear lies within. I've always been a keen hiker since I can remember. From childhood, I would go on hiking trips with my father, so that's where my passion for exploring came from. This experience that happened to me is, sadly, why I never go hiking alone anymore. I had recently gone through a breakup and felt I needed to clear my head, and the best way I knew how was to go hiking and be away from the rest of the world for a day. I travelled out of state into a forest that I had not been to before, somewhere new to explore, and to disconnect and just be with my thoughts for a while. Now, I didn't plan on camping, as I had commitments. I would have to return to the following day, so the trip was just a day trip to a dense forest, doing something that I enjoyed. I set out in the early morning to make the most of the day. When I arrived, I parked up near to the forest as close as I could, but the parking was still a walk away from the forest itself. When I reached it, I began my journey into the depths of the tall trees surrounding me. I had heard there was a beautiful creek located deep in there, and that was my aim, to find the creek and have some time to myself, looking at the beauty of nature. A few hours into my journey, I'd been enjoying my hike, and the quietness of nature of having no one else around it. It was nice to be alone and away from society for a while. I still hadn't come across the creek I was looking for though. As a regular hiker, I did something I'd done many times before, but that people are often told not to do for safety reasons. I broke off from the trail and decided to create my own route through the forest and see if I could stumble upon the creek a different way, being confident with my exploring capabilities. As the day wore on, I had still not come across what I was looking for, so I decided to take a break and rest by the stream I had found, replenishing myself with water and a sandwich that I had packed. Looking at my watch, I was surprised to see that I had already been out there hiking for nearly 5 hours. It was now late afternoon, and I became increasingly concerned by the time and having to make my way back. At that point, I readied my gear and conceded that I didn't have time to find the creek. I would need to think about making my way back instead. Having strayed from the original route and path, I was relying on myself to remember the way back from the route I had taken. As I travelled through the forest, I was slowly beginning to regret my decision of straying from the path. Having done this many times before, I had never had any problems, but now, I found myself lost. All I could see in front of me was the towering trees of the forest, and every direction looked the same. The further I walked in one direction, the more I didn't know if I was heading back the right way or not. I literally felt like I was in a maze. The sky, now beginning to darken, I looked again at my watch, keeping an eye on the time, and again, hours were passing, and I was no closer to getting back, or even finding the entrance where I'd come from. I got out my phone, looking to call a friend to let him know of my situation, when my heart sank. As I looked at my phone, I had no signal whatsoever. Now I was lost in the middle of a forest, the sun was setting, and I had no signal to contact anyone. I continued walking, in the hope that eventually I would just stumble my way out, but my legs were becoming increasingly tired. I had to stop for a rest. I had never got lost hiking before, and I couldn't believe the situation I found myself in. To make matters worse, the temperature had dropped. I was now beginning to feel the cold, and the rain began to fall, typically. I continued walking, as I was now soaked and afraid that I was going to be out there all night. Thinking how stupid I was and angry with myself, I suddenly saw something in the distance. As I got closer, I could see it was a rundown cabin. With it heavily raining and the realization that I may be out here all night, I thought the best option would be to see if it was accessible and to take shelter. As I approached, I made my way up the steps to the door. As I was about to try the doorknob, I hesitated, firstly knocking on the door. I just didn't know if maybe someone was living out here. As I knocked though, the door was actually unlocked, so slowly pushing it, it creaked open to the sight of a dark, bare room, consisting of only a chair and a broken table. Clearly abandoned, I thought to myself. If I was indeed stuck out here all night, I'd rather be inside under some shelter than in the cold, damp, pouring rain. Making my way inside, I placed my bag down and sat in the chair. My phone still having no signal, it was pointless having it. Looking around, the sound of the rain hitting the cabin made sitting in the darkness of the cabin quite eerie, to be honest. If it wasn't for the rain, it would have been deathly silent. I was tired and exhausted from the stress of being lost and worrying about finding my way back, but I still couldn't rest, so I decided to explore the cabin. Grabbing my bag, I made my way upstairs, every step I took creaking as if the stair was going to break. Reaching the top, there was a set of 3 rooms across the landing. I pushed the door open to the closest room. It was again bare, with only a rusted metal bed frame and a broken wardrobe in it. As I stood there in the doorway, what happened next made the hairs on my neck stand, and I will never forget that moment. A shiver ran down my spine, as from behind me, I heard the faint sound of someone crying. Slowly turning my head, my eyes landed on the door at the end of the hallway. The crying was coming from that room. I was frozen to the spot. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who was in that room, and the shock of hearing the crying and knowing I wasn't as alone as I had thought scared the shit out of me. Deciding that I had to see who was in there, and if they were okay, I slowly made my way over to the door. As I hesitantly called out, "Hello." Nearing the door, the crying continued, ringing in my ears. I said hello once more, and as if the situation couldn't get worse, the crying suddenly stopped. Silence fell apart from the rain. It was as if they had heard me. I slowly pushed my hand on the door, afraid to open it. But as it slowly moved, the crying I once heard was replaced with a deep, sinister, male laugh. I pulled my hand back in fear, and as I did, I could hear the booming footsteps of someone running towards the door from the darkness of the room. That was it. Scared shitless, I sprinted back down the stairs and up the front door, hearing the footsteps and laughter behind me. I ran back into the forest, not caring which way I was going, just wanting to get to safety and away from whoever the fuck was in that abandoned cabin. Looking back, no one had followed me out of the cabin. It took me all night to find my way back out of the forest and back onto a trail. When I finally got myself out of there and back to my car, the sun was up. All I wanted to do was get out of there. I have never known fear like it. I don't know who was in that cabin, but someone was in there, and I'm glad I didn't find out who. The crying, the laughter, and running after me, I know their intentions were not good. Since I've never been back to the same place, and when I do hike now, I never hike alone. I'm a 26-year-old male who lives in the US, and I love the great outdoors. Camping is something I've done since I was in my early teens, so it's been a hobby of mine since I can remember. Along with a buddy of mine who shares the same interest as me, we love exploring new places, often going on hikes and camping trips together, and in the US we are not short of open wilderness to explore. But the last trip we took together is one that will always stick with me and scares the shit out of me. We had decided to take a long weekend camping trip to a forest in the east near West Virginia we had not explored before. As mentioned, exploring new places was something we enjoyed. So, after getting all of our gear together and starting off on our trip, we made our way to the forest we had done some research on. When we reached our location, we went off the beaten track and made our own way up, going deep into the forest. We often strayed from paths and made our own routes. As long as we knew our way back to the car or main roads, we didn't see a problem with that. It was also good to do this to us, as it's not uncommon to meet other hikers when exploring the main trails, so making our own route we found we really had more privacy, and didn't bump into anyone, which added to the experience. The forest had trees taller than I'd seen before. They literally covered the sky above. When we had got deep enough inside, we found a great place to set up for the weekend. So, we unpacked, set up camp, and we took in the scenery around us. In our element, we decided whilst it was still early, we could do some more exploring and get to know the area and our new surroundings. As a keen photographer, I was in my element, taking pictures of the beauty of nature we found ourselves in. And after a good hour of hiking and enjoying the surrounding trails, we made our way back to our campsite as night began to fall, not wanting to be too far away from campsite when it was dark. But when the night finally came, the darkness consumed the area. We got our campfire roaring, bringing a warm glow to our campsite, and cooked some food whilst comparing the forest to previous camping trips we had taken. After a good couple of hours talking into the night and having a few beers, it was nearing midnight. Even after a day of hiking and exploring, we weren't tired yet, so we decided to have another drink as we kept our fire going, discussing what we would do the next day. As I got 2 more drinks, it was then I returned to my friend who, when I sat back down talking to him, was acting weird and had gone quiet all of a sudden, not wanting the conversation. I looked over at him and watched as he looked down, poking the remaining flames of the fire to keep it going. Again, I asked him a question, and he didn't answer. Not quite sure what was up with him, I asked if everything was okay. He looked up at me and said nothing, but more looked at me with concern in his eyes. He reached his hand out, gesturing for the bottle of beer. As I leaned over, passing it to him, he grabbed my hand, pulling me in closer. Thinking, what the fuck, it was then that he spoke to me in a quiet voice. He said, "Don't look now, but I think someone's watching us from behind the trees over in the front." What he told me shocked me. How was I not supposed to look now? I sat back in my chair, contemplating what he had just told me. Acting normal now, my friend thanked me for the beer. As we sat there, I sipped my beer, and without making it too obvious, I looked over in the direction he thought he had seen someone. As I quickly looked, I could indeed see the outline of a figure in the tree lining. My heart beginning to race, now thinking, who the fuck was watching us in the middle of a forest, gone midnight? Who the hell was out here? I looked back at my friend, acknowledging that I had seen what he was talking about. He whispered to me that we needed to confront whoever it was and that if need be, we had our hunting knives as we always did. I agreed, as someone watching us in the middle of the forest at night, in literally the middle of nowhere, who we didn't know, was fucking weird and downright creepy. It was then, as I stood up to go to my tent, we looked in the direction, and the person had gone. I looked back at my friend, and he couldn't see them either. It was then we heard it. The rustling and running footsteps in between the tree lining circling our campsite. My friend stood up as he told me to get the knife and flashlight. I didn't hesitate as he shouted, asking who was out there, and that we had seen them. I returned with my knife and my flashlight, passing the light to my friend, the fire slowly dying with less light to the area. As we shone the light around the tree lining, we again could hear the footsteps moving between the trees in the distance, but to our fear, there was more than one set of footsteps running out there. There was clearly more than one person out there watching us. My friend, shining the flashlight in all directions, slightly seeing the dark figure in the distance, my heart racing, not knowing what this was and what these people were doing. Backing up to our tents, my friend shouted for them to show themselves and what it was they wanted. I grabbed my camera from the tent, thinking I could use the flash to try and get pictures of who was out there. As I clenched my knife and held out my camera, it was then we heard the sounds of male chants and screams coming from the distance in the tree lining. I quickly flashed my camera, taking a burst of photos of the area, and as I looked down at the images, the color drained from my skin. There were multiple figures in the near distance, the flash lighting up multiple sets of eyes. I could count offhand maybe 10 people. Showing my friend, I saw the fear in his face. Then, as the chanting stopped and silence fell, we could only hear the sound of wind traveling through the trees, until a figure came forward, just enough that we could see their outline in the distance, shouting,
"Leave now, whilst you have the chance."
Hearts racing and seeing the outline of more figures slowly join him sent our adrenaline through the roof. We wasted no time in accepting our warning, grabbing our bags and leaving our tents behind and getting ourselves out of there and in the opposite direction and the way we had come. All the while, looking back to see if anyone was following us. It took us an age to get back to the car at night, but there was no chance we were staying around after that. When we got back to our car, we just wanted to get to the nearest town and away from there. We stayed in a motel for a day and tried to understand what had happened and who was out there. From talking to locals, we believe we had found ourselves camping in the forest, near where people lived in the forest, as we were told it was not uncommon for groups of people to live out in the forests. Forest people, tribes, whatever you want to call them. But whoever they were, we were definitely not wanted, and we were not welcome in that area. We were lucky we got out of there when we did, and when told to do so, as who knows what would have happened. The image that I caught on my camera still sends shivers down my spine today. the multiple sets of eyes glowing from the camera light, will always stay with me. This trip has not stopped us camping, but we tend to stick to the designated trails now. We don't want to ever experience something like that again.